does it end in 77?
Social segregation.
No. There's a specific event that ends it. Go ahead.
The election of 1876.
Okay.
Custodian, please call 5742.
The election of 1876
Anna,
ends
please call
Reconstruction.
5742.
Right? How? Explain that to me. Somebody, Emily, explain that to me. The election of 1876 ends radical Reconstruction or Congressional Reconstruction. How so? Emory, can you do that? Can you explain? Well, let's go back. Who are the candidates in the election? Hayes versus. Wow, go ahead. Tilden versus Hayes. Who was the Democrat? Who was the Democrat in the election of 7? Where were you people when I talked about this? All right, now let's think back. There was an election. There are generally two candidates. One of the candidates is a Republican, one is a Democrat. Hayes is the Republican, Tilden's the Democrat, right? Who wins the election? Hayes. So what's the big deal? Go ahead.
There was like behind it, there was a deal made.
Oh, so there were contested election returns in 3 states. And so then the question was, what set of election returns to accept? The ones that said that Hayes had won those states, or the ones that said that Tilden had won those states, right? If we accepted the ones that said Hayes won those states, he would win the election, right? If we accepted the ones that said that Tilden won those states, he would win the election. So a deal was made that's sometimes called the Compromise of 77. What was it? What, Lindsay, dear Lindsay, what was the Compromise of 77? That was the end of Reconstruction. But go ahead, McMasters.
So since Hayes was elected, the Democrats wanted more to give Union troops out of the South and to give pay.
So then in return for the Democrats allowing the Republican returns, the Democrats in return for allowing the Republicans to win the election demanded that Hayes withdraw federal troops from the South, which he does. Now, why does that end Reconstruction? Because the only way those Republican governments stayed in power in the South was at the end of federal troops. Bayonets, northern bayonets. I mean, Reconstruction, radical Reconstruction, Congressional Reconstruction, those coalition governments could only stay in power as long as the federal government made a commitment to them. The withdrawal of federal troops signified the end of that commitment. Hence, radical Reconstruction ended. Now, after radical Reconstruction ended, we talked about, the status and the condition of African Americans in the South. We talked about sharecropping, and there are questions on the test about sharecropping. We talked about political disenfranchisement and the literacy test and the grandfather clauses and other ways that the ex-Confederate states attempted to prevent African Americans from voting, circumventing the 15th Amendment. But we also talked about social segregation, right? Social segregation. And social segregation was established with the Jim Crow laws. Now, what were, dear Melissa, the Jim Crow laws?
Like separated whites and blacks.
Yeah, they were legislation passed on the state level that established separate societies for whites and blacks. Now, were the Jim Crow laws and the black codes the same thing? The answer is no. So how about this? How about you tell me how they were different? Because you're going to get questions about both on the test. The Jim Crow laws and the black codes. What's the difference? Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
The Jim Crow laws legally allow segregated.
Yeah, the Jim Crow laws implemented sort of segregated society. The black codes were those laws that were passed in that interim period. Remember, under the Johnson-Lincoln Reconstruction Plan, the black codes were deemed unconstitutional by the 14th Amendment, right? So they were gone. Now, once the white South took over, the state governments in the South, they passed Jim Crow laws that were kind of a version of the black codes, but they were different. They established separate societies, separate schools, separate facilities. Now, there was a famous Supreme Court case that said that this was all okay. What was it? What year? Go ahead, Courtney.
Plessy versus Ferguson.
Yes, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, said it was okay to have separate facilities, public facilities in the South for blacks and whites as long as they were equal. Right? Now, in your textbook, you know, the way that this material is presented is in a different order than we presented it in class. So when you read through, you might see things that are in a different sort of order, and that's okay. But usually the questions on the test come in the order of the textbook, right? Not the order necessarily that we covered it in class. Now, that kind of ends chapter 23, and then we got into chapter 24, and chapter 24 was a discussion of the political situation in the South, or I shouldn't say in the South, in the country. You know, Gilded Age politics. Now, in terms of Gilded Age politics, we said that there were some interesting things about the political situation in the country. And the most interesting was this. We said that during this period, there was a tremendous amount of interest in politics. And that interest was reflected in a high voter turnout. You know, people flocked to the polls, they voted in large numbers, you know, there was a lot of interest and excitement about political elections. And we said this was ironic because there weren't any real, you know, outstanding leaders. Issues were kind of minimized in elections. Political corruption was widespread. And so it didn't seem reasonable that people should be interested in politics. And we said this was ironic. But we offered some explanations, and some of the things that we said attracted people to politics were things like patronage. So there are a couple of questions on the test about patronage. Now, Nicole, what do we mean by that? We say patronage. You know, patronage was something that was a problem. Patronage was something that attracted people to politics and generated interest. What do I mean by patronage? Go ahead, dear Nicole.
Vote for me, I'll give you some money or something.
You vote for me and I'll give you money, or more specifically, a job, right? So the fruits of office were jobs, right? 160,000 federal government jobs that were up for grabs basically every election. Local government jobs that were up for grabs. People wanted these jobs. They harassed, you know, political leaders to get these jobs, and they went to the polls many times to keep these jobs or to acquire these jobs. So patronage was a big deal. Oh, incidentally, just for fun, where did this whole patronage sort of situation start? Yes, go ahead. Jackson. The spoil system with Jackson, and it explodes in this era. Now, besides patronage, we said there were emotional issues. And one of the emotional issues was the Civil War. And we said one of the things that the North did was referred to as waving the bloody shirt. Now, when a Northern politician, a Republican, waved the bloody shirt in a campaign, what did that mean? Waving the bloody shirt. What did that mean? Go ahead, dear Emery. Pardon me? Well, they may have been a general in the Civil War, and they said, you should vote for me, and you should vote for a Northern Republican, because what was the Democratic Party? The Democratic Party was the party of secession. They were the party of treason. They were the party that started the Civil War. This shirt is like really bloody because they started a war where a lot of people got killed in it, right? And so vote how you shot. And this was a very emotional issue. Remember we said, dear Emery, that all the successful Republican candidates for president at the time had been Civil War generals, that the bloody shirt was something that would bring people to the polls, that there were like 1 million people still alive that had served in the Union Army at one time or another in 1890, which is, you know, sort of a ridiculous amount of potential voters. You know, so this waving the bloody shirt was a powerful image. The Democrats had their own bloody shirt, and that was radical Reconstruction. And that was, some of the things that we mentioned that brought people to the polls. We also mentioned this, that there